Yes, ma'am. Oh. See, I'm thinking I'll do like Judy Garland. We'll see. We'll see if they'll let me do that in the big theater. Yes. Yes. I've been with the programming team here at the festival since 2014, and ever since then, and even before, when I wasn't asked to contribute to programming, I've been asking for us to show the 1954 version of A Star is Born. It's one of my favorite films, and I'm so glad we're finally doing it. I mean, what fascinates me about this movie so much, part of it at least, is the backstory on how this movie got made is such a huge story in itself. There have been 2 entire books written about the making of this film and the restoration of this film. There's a brand new documentary about the making of this film, all about Judy Garland and her third husband, Sidney Luft, and what a personal passion project this was for the 2 of them. But I guess it's always best to start at the beginning, and that is with the original 2 versions of this story, this quintessential Hollywood fable about one person determined to make it to the top and another who unfortunately falls into the bottom. It started with a 1932 movie called What Price Hollywood, directed by George Cukor, and was remade only 5 years later, not officially remade, but retitled and told in pretty much the exact same way for a 1937 movie officially called A Star is Born, both produced by David Selznick, and both very successful films. And Judy Garland, who was under contract to MGM from 1935 to 1950, first encountered this story when she was asked to do a radio production of it in 1942. And falling in love with the story, she pitched it to Louis B. Mayer of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, saying, could we set this to music? And Louis B. Mayer said, well, no, it's already been made twice, and no, you're all about happy stuff. You're not a dramatic actress yet, Judy. So it didn't happen. Then in 1952, after Judy Garland had gone through some very well-documented troublesome periods, being fired from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and even attempting suicide after that firing, she had begun to revive her career in concerts. Some very successful and very popular concerts in New York and in Los Angeles, under the direction of her new husband and manager, Sidney Luft, who was mostly known as a B-movie producer in the 1940s, up until that time. But the 2 of them thought, you know what, now that we're out on our own and you are a producer and my manager, can we try again with this A Star is Born project? So they went to Judy's director of choice, Mr. George Cukor, one of my all-time favorite directors. The Philadelphia Story, Little Women, all kinds of My Fair Lady, all kinds of wonderful, wonderful stuff. And, most notably, the first What Price Hollywood from 1932. And he jumped at the chance, even though he wasn't a big fan of remakes, he jumped at the chance to make his first Technicolor film, his first musical, and to work with the incredibly talented Judy Garland. So the 3 of them pitched it to several studios, and the ones who jumped at it were Warner Brothers. Jack Warner was notorious for always jumping at the chance to take on a star from another studio and bank on them. Most notably would be Joan Crawford, who he brought over from MGM and revived her career with Mildred Pierce in 1945. And he thought he could do the same with Judy and with this project. And they went all out. It was a $5 million budget, a 10-month-long shooting schedule, an enormous, enormous movie. And it's not Judy's fault, though she was very unreliable during the making of the movie, from what I've read. But a lot of things were happening in the movie business at the time. Probably most significantly was the dawn of the new widescreen process, CinemaScope, which extended the image of the film, and which started in the early 50s, around 1953 when this movie was being made. But they let the Lufts pretty much do whatever they wanted with this picture. Judy wanted Harold Arlen and Ira Gershwin to write the score. They let her do it. Moss Hart, the legendary playwright, they let him write the script. And so yeah, they went all out with the movie. And About 2 months into the filming process was when they threw away $300,000 to reshoot the movie in the new CinemaScope process. So they just, they had bottomless pockets with this movie, and it ended up costing over $5 million and was a 10-month shooting schedule from October of '53 to July of '54. One thing that they weren't successful with was some of their original casting choices. George Cukor and Judy Garland and Sid Luft's first choice for the role of Norman Maine was Cary Grant. Yeah. George Cukor had worked with Cary Grant 3 times prior and really wanted him to play this part, and even went directly to his house and had him read the part, and he later said that was some of the most moving performances he'd ever seen Cary Grant do. But Cary Grant, who we all love Cary Grant, but he would never be anything but the perfect Cary Grant. And the character of Norman Maine, an alcoholic, has-been actor, was not the perfect Cary Grant that Cary Grant was always determined to be. So he turned down the part, and then several other noted actors were considered: Humphrey Bogart, Jimmy Stewart, Gary Cooper. And then it came down to 2 British actors, Walter Granger and James Mason. James Mason won out, and of course gives a wonderful, wonderful performance himself. Very moving, very, very deep performance. Both he and Judy were nominated for Academy Awards for their work. Another thing that added to the enormous budget of the film was the legendary Born in a Trunk sequence. If you're not familiar with the film, it's this 18-minute musical number, an enormous musical number, right before the intermission of the film, which added another $200,000 to the budget, and which was shot sometime after principal photography, and is not directed by George Cukor, by the way. It's unofficially directed by a man named Roger Edens, who was the musical director at MGM for years and groomed Judy Garland from her early teens to the great musical performer that she became. It's a wonderful, wonderful musical number. I adore it, and it's one of the most famous parts of the movie, but it did add a lot of time and a lot of money to the movie. When the movie premiered in September of '54, glowing reviews, very good box office, but it did go over budget and did run long. So the New York offices of Warner Brothers thought, you know what, one thing we could do to make our money back faster would be to cut the film a little bit so that we can get more showings. So George Cukor, the director, was unavailable. Sidney Luft and Judy Garland were not consulted. So Jack Warner, the head of production at Warner Brothers, suddenly saw himself as a movie editor and cut down about 27 minutes of the movie, deleting 2 big musical numbers and very critical scenes between the actors, and pretty much butchered the movie. It left noticeable holes in the story, and when they re-released it at 2.5 hours, people didn't understand the movie. It was re-reviewed and said, they've ruined this movie, and the box office eventually depleted. However, it did still receive enough positive reviews that it did get some award nominations, 6 in total. Production design, costume design, original song for The Men That Got Away, original score, and Best Actor for James Mason and Best Actress for Judy Garland. If I have any awards buffs here, Judy Garland's loss of Best Actress is considered one of the most notorious and scandalous oversights in the Academy's history, and it's a great story in itself. The day before the Oscar ceremony, Judy Garland went into premature birth with her 3rd child, Joey Luft. And the story goes that after she had given birth to her child, Joey, she was in her hospital bed, and NBC, who was broadcasting the Oscars at that time, actually came to the hospital, built a huge lift outside of her hospital window, and were all set to capture her Oscar acceptance speech the night that she was going to win the award. And it was to everyone's shock and dismay that the Oscar went to Grace Kelly for a movie called The Country Girl. Yeah, it's an okay movie. It's an okay movie. It's worth watching. But of course, it has not had the legendary status that A Star Is Born and Judy Garland in that movie have. So, but it was the year of Grace Kelly. She made 4 movies that year: Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, all kinds of hits. So I mean, it's not a, I don't think it was a total shock that that happened. And also, Judy Garland, again, having developed a reputation as being unreliable, had just kind of burned too many bridges within Hollywood. But it's still regarded as one of the biggest oversights in the Academy's history by critics and historians. The film remained in that 2.5-hour state until 1983, when it underwent a huge restoration by a man named Ronald Haver, who was determined to find the full-length cut of the film. The original 3-hour soundtrack still existed, and he did a couple of things. He found 2 very critical scenes in their completion and was able to put them back into the film. And then the remaining 7 minutes, which are still not in existence, are done with just still photographs of the movie played over the soundtrack, and you'll see it that way this evening. I can't understand how the movie was released in its full length for 2 weeks across the nation, and some full cut print does not exist somewhere. That makes no sense to me, but apparently that's all that still exists. I hear things about private collectors still owning a full length cut of the film, but they haven't come forward, so yeah. That's the case with a lot of lost films. They're in projectionists' grandsons' attics and places. It's really archaeological about the films that are lost to us. Silent films and re-edited films and things like that. The print, the particular, well, it's not a print, we're watching a DCP tonight, but it is a new 4K restoration of the film that originally premiered at the first Turner Classic Movies Film Festival back in 2010. That was the one that we are showing this evening, and that was the first time that I had seen it on the big screen. And tonight is going to be the second time that I've seen it on the big screen. I haven't seen this movie, which I love so much, on the big screen since then, so I'm very excited. What are some of your all's questions and comments and thoughts about A Star is Born?
So the movie that we're going to watch this evening, it is a cut-up version of it?
It's the full soundtrack. So, okay. The movie previewed at 196 minutes, 3 hours and 15 minutes. It is a long movie, by the way. Just FYI, if you haven't seen it, be ready to sit down for a little while. And then it was cut for its premiere in September of '54 at the Pantages Theater at 181 minutes, 3 hours. What they didn't do, which we're doing tonight, is we're going to include an intermission. That's what you needed to do with long, epic movies at that time. Make it into an epic event picture, charge slightly higher ticket prices, have an intermission, make it a road picture, is what they should have done and what we're doing this evening. So, yeah. But yeah, the one we're going to watch tonight is it's 176 minutes. We're going to include an intermission, and there's going to be about 6 minutes of the film. You're just going to see still images, but you'll hear the soundtrack going, and you'll be able to understand it. It's not a lot of the movie, but there are little bits that, you know.
So the original A Star is Born was 1937?
Yep.
And who starred in that?
Fredric March.
Fredric March and Janet Gaynor, very good, yes. And it's good, yeah. It doesn't have the epic scope that this one is, and it's not a musical.
It was released in color?
Yes, it was shot in Technicolor. One of the early 3-strip Technicolor films. Yes, sir?
Regarding the Academy, if Judy would have lived, do you think that the Academy would have perhaps given her due and provided her?
Well, she did win an Oscar in 1939 for The Wizard of Oz, an honorary juvenile Oscar. She used to call it her little munchkin.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think, though, the whole tragedy surrounding this film, though, accelerated her decline? Do you think if she had won the Oscar, they had not butchered this movie?
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. I do know that it ended her interest, basically, with Hollywood and the movie business. After this film became a financial disappointment, and after it had gone so over budget, Warner Brothers canceled the Luffs. It was originally going to be a 3-picture deal with them, and that was canceled. And so, yeah, it was a huge, devastating disappointment that the film failed and then that she didn't win. But she went on to so many other triumphs. That's what I love so much about Judy Garland, is just when she was so down and then this huge triumph at the end. She had some of her greatest days ahead of her. She earned another Oscar nomination for her supporting performance in Judgment at Nuremberg. She made 2 more movies, and then she had some legendary concert appearances and a TV show. And yeah, it was just, it did end what could have continued her movie career as a grown-up and as a dramatic actress throughout the 50s. I think of movies that came out just after that she maybe could have done, or maybe something similar. Things like Love Me or Leave Me with Doris Day, or I'll Cry Tomorrow with Susan Hayward. The Helen Morgan story, which she was considered for. She was considered for that in 1957, but it didn't happen. So.
She made that very good movie, that British movie, I Can Go On Singing.
Yes.
With Dirk Bogarde.
Yes.
And I found her performance to be
Very
fantastic
moving.
in that movie.
Very moving. Yeah, she made 3 more movies after A Star Is Born. 4. She did an animated movie called Gay Perrine, cute little cartoon, much better than the Aristocats. Judgment at Nuremberg, A Child Is Waiting with Burt Lancaster, in which she doesn't sing. I've often said of Judy Garland, she didn't have to sing a note. She was an amazing dramatic actress. If you watch I Could Go On Singing, but she does sing it, but if you watch Judgment at Nuremberg, The Clock, beautiful movie, yeah, she didn't have to sing a note. Yeah. But thank God to the world that she did. Yes, sir. Sure.
Okay. Y'all, I want to tell y'all a really quick story. I'll make this really, really short. Okay. There's this guy who restored Liza with a Z back in a few years ago. His name's Michael Eric. And he was on stage with Liza at the Toronto Film Festival when they premiered Liza with a Z. Well, in 2010, there's an article, you can read it online, talking about how this man is reported to own an uncut copy of A Star Is Born. I'm going to tell you why we haven't seen it, and the reason why a lot of people think it's true. 2 reasons. One, they found a log sheet. You can go into any studio, and Jack knows this because Jack works at Warner Brothers, for those who don't know this. If you're a collector, you can go into a studio and rent a screening room. They found a log from Universal from the 90s. And Mr. Eric showed that movie to a bunch of his friends, but of course we don't know if it was the full version. I'll tell you what happened. Jack's bosses, before Jack got to Warner Brothers, Michael had a print of Elia Kazan's Streetcar Named Desire. It had some footage in it that now it's out, director's cut version. The Catholic League of Decency made them cut out about 4 or 5 minutes of the movie. Michael Eric had this print. He let Warner Brothers use it because he was working there, and they said, "You're going to get credit if you let us use this print." They didn't give him any credit, so Warner Brothers kind of screwed him. Well, a couple of years ago, someone cornered Liza and said, "So Liza, Michael restored Liza with a Z. What about the Star Is Born print?" She just smirked and said, "Oh, I think you have to ask him about that." So yeah. So.
I mean, we'll see. I've heard about a gentleman in Phoenix that supposedly has a uncut version, another one in San Francisco. We'll see. I mean, there's so much issues with copyright that's the problem. People who own these things aren't necessarily supposed to own them. So if they were to present them to a studio, it can present conflict. I don't know. We'll see what happens. There's so many lost and fascinating footage in places. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yes, sir.
Is this one of the first movies to use cinemascope?
Yes, it is. It's not the first, but it's one of, absolutely.
As I love space.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the things that Hollywood was doing at the time to counter the rise of television, was they made their movies bigger and grander, so with new technologies like a widescreen process and with more sound and 3D and all that thing. That was all happening in the early 50s. Yeah. What else? Yes, sir?
Would you say that Judy Garland's performance as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz was probably the most renowned film that you remember as far as the musical goes?
I would say that The Wizard of Oz is her most remembered film and most famous film. I don't know if it would be her best. I mean, I'm of the opinion that Judy Garland never gave a bad performance. So But if you ask me what is the most personal and what is the most raw and what ended up being her personal favorite of all her performances and films, it would be A Star is Born. Yeah. But she loved The Wizard of Oz very much. Yeah, absolutely. What else? Yes, sir.
This has nothing to do with Judy Garland, but it's so wonderful to hear her sing. But this is our third movie, and the first moved to, and the film classic, and the sound has been so bad, you couldn't even understand.
We did. We had a glitch with the projection, up in the projection booth today. That was on the town stopped for a little while. But it should be fixed for the movie tonight.
So it's gonna be okay.
It should be just fine. Hope so.
Do you know if they ever showed the movie in St. Louis?
Yes, we have, and we brought Margaret O'Brien to talk about it. Yeah.
Can you bring it back?
Maybe someday.
Is she still alive?
Yes, she is. She's yeah.
She's probably gonna be surviving.
She's 82. My favorite moment in the movie. I would say The Man That Got Away, musically. I would say I do love the Born in the Trunk sequence, and then a moment towards the end of the film, which was cut, is the moment in her dressing room. That's a very moving monologue and very moving performance. Yeah. Yes.
Is that where she's crying to Charles?
Where she's talking to Charles Bickford about, Judy's performance and a lot of the things that she says and a lot of the things that are happening to the character of Norma Maine, when you apply them to the character, not the character, but the actual woman of Judy Garland, and what was happening in her life and what happened over the course of her life, it's very art imitating life, you know.
Do you have any opinion about the
The Renee Zellweger, the Judy movie. Yeah, I've seen the previews of it. We'll see. It's based on a very bad play called End of the Rainbow, and we'll see. I mean, I wouldn't have cast Renee Zellweger as Judy Garland, and it's my understanding that Renee Zellweger is doing her own singing. So we'll see. I mean, I'll watch it. Yeah, and it's the same thing with the Lady Gaga Star is Born. I mean, it was fine for what it was, I guess. Yeah, and here's my thing with the Lady Gaga Stars and the Streisand Stars Born, is they shifted it into the world of music, not the world of Hollywood. And what I love about the first three is that they're all about, that's why I call it the quintessential Hollywood fable. It should stay a story about Hollywood. My A Star is Born for the new millennium is La La Land. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to mention that this is the 50th anniversary of Judy's passing.
Yes. Yes, June 18th, 1969, yeah.
You had mentioned that you work for Warner Brothers.
I do.
What do you do there?
Right now, I'm just with the tours department. I was in clearances and permissions, and then I also write for Turner Classic Movies. I'm one of their writers.
Are you from El Paso?
I lived in El Paso for 15 years.
So you're visiting from El Paso?
I come back for the festival every year if I can.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you all for being here. Yes?
So, we should ask Warner Brothers to redo Brad for the season.
We'll see. As far as the tour department goes, I would say about 90% of the people who come to the tour get a photo on the friend's couch. So yeah, that's yeah. It was cool to work on a few films and contribute to that when I was in clearances. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
So why is this your favorite movie of all time?
I don't know if it is my favorite movie of all time. Well, I love movies and I love the Hollywood myth and all that, and I feel like this is the best one about that Hollywood myth. Maybe this, Sunset Boulevard, The Artist. I love The Artist too. But in terms of the story itself and the performances and the music and the glamour of the whole thing, but also, again, the backstory and how it went into it, it's my favorite movie about the movies, and I love the movies, so.
It wasn't Judy Garland considered for the part of Mama Rose in Gypsy Village,
I've heard that before. I don't know how seriously she was considered. I know she actually did wardrobe test and shot some takes for the role of Helen Lawson in Valley of the Dolls. And those wardrobe tests still exist, so.
And then she showed up 2 weeks later at the London Palladium wearing her wardrobe.
Yeah.
She took the costumes, I think.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
We have some Judy buffs here tonight. I love it.
Whether she's a one and only as far as I'm concerned.
Yes. What else?
Did she die broke?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, she, a lot happened in her life. But yeah, towards the end, with all the things she'd been through, she owed a lot back taxes from the 50s, and her television show, which was supposed to save her financially and professionally, it didn't work out. And, her ending is very sad. But one of the things I love most about Judy Garland is that despite all of her hardships, she continued to make beautiful work, and she was always a person who loved life. The people who knew her, what they say most about her is that she was hysterically funny and hysterically happy. Yes, ma'am.
Can you say more about her television program?
Her television program,
Yeah.
from 1963 to 64, she had her own series, The Judy Garland Show, which that's another thing that a lot of drama went into the making of that. And there's whole books about that as well. But yeah, it's a great show. She had great guests. There's some legendary performances that she gave with great people, and a lot of. Well, a couple of reasons for that as well. It was up against Bonanza. It was a troubled production. It was a very expensive show, and it didn't happen. It didn't last as long as it should have. But the 1 year that it was on includes some amazing, amazing performances by her and others. So yeah, YouTube. I'm YouTubing that all the time to watch great performances of that. Yeah, and also going back to keeping it back at A Star Is Born, the movie premiere of this movie, the Hollywood premiere of this movie at the Hollywood Pantages is taped, and it's an amazing watch. I kind of suggested during programming that we should maybe show it in here, but it's an amazing thing. I think it's the grandest Hollywood premiere ever caught on tape. So many amazing people are there. You just see them coming in one after the other. You see Joan Crawford, you see Kim Novak, then you see Dean Martin, one star after the other at the Pantages premiere of this movie. YouTube it. It's amazing. Just YouTube A Star Is Born 54 premiere.
Which is kind of meta when you think about it, because I think it started the movie is
Yes, yes. Yeah.
It's a premiere that started the movie, it's true.
Well, it's not the premiere of a movie. It's for just a public Hollywood event. And yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Wasn't a very young Barbara Streisand one of her guests
On the TV show, yes. Yes, a 21-year-old Barbara Streisand. Yeah, who, there's an amazing three-way performance between Barbara, Judy, and Ethel Merman.
They're all
And yeah. And when you watch it, Ethel Merman is kind of like, oh, who's this little girl? And Barbara's like, well, because Barbara Streisand, she made 2 albums, but she was not a star then. And she has always said she's eternally grateful to Judy Garland for having her on her show. She was definitely not at the level of the other people like Lena Horne and Tony Bennett that were coming on her show at that time. Barbara Streisand was not there yet. And at one point, Ethel Merman says, oh, so what do you have next? And she says, well, I'm doing a new musical called Funny Girl. And after that, the rest, as they say, is history.
One of her tape concerts, Barbara Streisand's concerts, one of her tape concerts, right before she sang her version of The Man That Got Away, she looks up at the sky and says, this is for you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes,
What
ma'am.
did you say about La La Land and
Can you elaborate on how you think that's the better?
Well, no, all I mean by that is I feel like A Star is Born, what makes the first three so wonderful is they're Hollywood on Hollywood. And the Streisand and Gaga one are about the world of rock music. And I feel like La La Land and The Artist are still Hollywood on Hollywood. And they're about the rise and cost of fame, and they're much more on brand for what I think A Star is Born is.
Did you, this is from Stay with the Star Wars Born kind of name, you know, there's kind of a leaked version of the draft that Clint Eastwood was working on.
Right, yeah, that was the original plan. It was gonna be Clint Eastwood and Beyonce.
And you know what happened with Beyonce? And
Not Clint Eastwood playing the Norman, Clint Eastwood directing. Yeah. That would have been, yeah, a reverse Harold and Maude or something. Yeah.
Clint Eastwood directing with Beyonce, and at one point during it, it was actually thought of making her sort of a Dorothy Dandridge kind of thing. It was gonna be sort of period as.
Yeah, I was much more interested in the newest Star is Born when that was gonna be the case. But one of the people that was considered for the Norman Maine role was Bradley Cooper with Stuart Eastwood directing. But when Beyonce dropped out and Eastwood decided not to do it, Bradley Cooper picked it up. And he did a good job. I mean, yeah, it's, yeah, I mean, yeah, the first half was okay. He did a good job, yeah. It's good.
But not this one.
But not this one.
You know what a friend of mine said about the Renee Zellweger trailer, you know, with her singing.
Right.
He said, well, you know, Judy's voice was really ragged. And so that's
Where does he live? I'm just kidding.
Now, as far as a Judy Garland biopic, I love the Judy Davis miniseries that they did.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was very well done. Very well done.
Well, that's where she was meeting with the board of the show.
Yes.
Yes. At the Judy Davis, based on Mormonism. Shadows.
Anything else? Should we go watch the movie?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.